Hey folks, I'm Rob Franek. I'm editor-in-chief here at the Princeton Review, and today we are going to answer the age-old question, should you take the SAT or the ACT? And folks, if you're planning to apply to a selective school, you must take either the SAT or ACT. This is not a suggestion. This is an absolute necessity in our books here at the Princeton Review. And look, if you're anything like our students, I know what you're thinking. You can find a way around it. You can find a way to not take the SAT or ACT. Trust us. There are almost no scenarios in which you won't need an SAT or ACT in hand when you're applying to colleges in the next year or years. That said, our team did geek out on this point, and we've come up with two very unlikely scenarios that I suspect you'll be interested in knowing. Scenario number one, you're applying only to schools with test-blind admission policies. And scenario number two, you have an absolute promise of admittance from a school that says that you do not need a test score. Folks, if you've been with me in other videos, then you know this is true. Either of those scenarios are incredibly rare. And from where I'm sitting, none of them can be counted on. You need to be prepared literally for all scenarios that can help you get into your dream college and literally earn scholarship dollars to pay for it. So, which test will you be taking, the SAT, the ACT, or possibly even both? You know it is an incredibly important choice for you because the simple answer is that you should take the test, which you're gonna score better on. Yeah, of course. But let's also remember that these two tests are considered equally from admission offices from C to shining C because those schools can compare scores between the SAT and the ACT for each administration of those tests. That said, finding which test is best for you is the tougher scenario, even tougher than it was a few years ago, because the SAT is now a computer adaptive test with only 2 hours of testing time. Now the ACT, right now as we're recording this video, is still a 3-hour test, and it is entirely administered as a pencil and paper test. That said, in 2025, the ACT is slimming down its testing time and will be offering students a choice between a pencil and paper test as well as online administrations. Now, I recorded a whole video about all of those ACT changes coming up. We'll link it in the info card below. That said, there are many, many differences current day between the SAT and the ACT. So with that in mind, we're gonna break down those differences between the two exams by addressing self-descriptions that we hear from our own students here at the Princeton Review. Scenario number one, this is student scenario number one. Student number one says, and I quote, "I prefer my science courses." Folks, if you are like student number one, you should know the following. Your scientific knowledge and your expertise won't give you an advantage on either the ACT or the SAT. Now, the ACT does have a science section, which the SAT does not. The ACT science section is a section with passages dedicated solely to scientific topics. While the SAT doesn't have a dedicated science section, it does ask science-related questions throughout its reading and writing section. So if you take a practice ACT and you follow it with a practice SAT, which you can do for free on princetonreview.com, I'll put a link to that in the website below, but if you take a practice SAT, practice ACT, you will think that the questions are eerily familiar. Those SAT questions are truly very similar to those ACT science questions, which the ACT actually says are a measure of skills rather than knowledge. So that leads me on to point number two, which is student scenario number two. Student number two says the following, and I quote, "I get best grades in my English classes." Now you should know that if your best subject in school is English, you may see that half of the SAT is math and half of the ACT is math and science and get nervous because it doesn't play to your strengths. But let's also remember that the other half of each test is dedicated to reading and writing and English sections. And that breakdown really does undersell how much you'll be reading on either test. Most math questions on the SAT or ACT are actually word problems that require analyzing sentence structures and key phrases, right? So the English and reading sections rely on you identifying very fine details in complex passages, often requiring very close reading skills, just like you learned in your high school English classes. So when you take a practice SAT or a practice ACT, you'll see just how much reading you will have to do in every section. And if you do earn your best grades in your English classes in high school, the reason that you get those grades will surely help you on either the SAT or the ACT. That leads me on to student scenario number 3. Student number 3 says the following: I've always been nervous about computer tests. Now folks, if you're anything like student number 3, you should know the following. Now obviously, the digital computer adaptive SAT will seem scary if you're generally nervous around computer tests, but don't assume that the pencil and paper ACT will automatically be a better test for you. Remember that you'll have an option to take an online ACT come 2025, and that every computer-based test is different from others. Now, you may not like the interfaces that you've had experience with to date in computer-based tests, but that said, the SAT, the digital SAT platform, may well be easier for you. And additionally, the ACT format is very unique, so it might not be the one that you actually love. Chances are, friends, you're going to find things bothersome about both tests when you take a practice SAT or a practice ACT, because the SAT and the ACT are standardized tests. They're not made to be fun or even pleasant experiences for a student, but you can find a test that makes you feel comfortable in that testing environment. And that leads me to student scenario number 4. Student number 4 says the following: I get anxious when I take standardized tests. Friends, if you are anything like student number 4, you should know the following: you are not alone. Test anxiety is common because tests are stressful, and the SAT and ACT are super important tests, not only for academic admission, but also for the use of awarding scholarship dollars. And folks, I'm going to say this part out loud very clearly. When you start SAT or ACT practice tests, you may start feeling stress while taking it on your laptop in the comfort of your home, of your own home. This is actually, secretly, the greatest thing about a practice test, because you're not only practicing the content of the exam, but you're practicing overcoming anxiety. So we're going to put this in some perspective. The SAT and the ACT are both standardized tests. They are both forcing you to answer exacting questions in a limited amount of time. This is one reason that test anxiety happens to many students, because you're not AI, you're human. So suffice it to say that near everyone across the planet gets stressed about standardized tests, but you can so do this because the SAT and the ACT are some of the most coachable tests on the planet. That leads me on to student scenario number 5. Now, student scenario number 5, student number 5 says the following: I'm applying to extremely selective colleges. Folks, if this sounds like you, it's good to remember that those colleges with extremely low admit rates, whether those schools are test optional or test flexible or test required, accept students who stand out from most applicants. That means an application from those students. They have to have top grades. They have to have top recommendations. They have to have top essays. They have to have top extracurricular activities, and they have to have top SAT and ACT scores. These scores will want to see your superlative scores on either test, and they do not care which test you submit to them for consideration. Now, as I have mentioned, you can get a baseline score for the SAT or ACT right now by taking an SAT and ACT practice test, and no matter which test you actually choose, you will always need to prepare. If you are taking the SAT or ACT, you must prepare for those exams. Now, one of the things that I love best about teaching at Princeton Review, but I love this about our practice tests, is that every student that takes one will get a score report. So you'll receive a score report once you complete a practice test for the SAT or ACT, which is a super detailed, very clearly detailing your areas of strength and your areas of weakness. You'll literally be able to laser focus on areas that you'll need to improve to crush the SAT or ACT. Friends, that rounds out all of our student scenarios. And as always, if you have any questions about any of the content that we covered today on the differences between the SAT or ACT, do not hesitate. Put them into the chat. I do my level best to get some answers out to you very quickly. If you haven't done this already, please do subscribe to our channel to get the latest and greatest information on college admission and testing and rankings and ratings and paying for college, literally the works. I'm Franek. I'm editor-in-chief here at the Princeton Review. Be well.